everyone. Thank you so much for coming to our office hour session today, where we will be focusing on the complex topic of capacity planning and breaking it down for you all. Again, it's always great to see some familiar faces here and meet some new ones. I'm Valerie, and I'm on the product marketing team here at Assembled, and my former life was actually starting in customer success. So always great to see a few of the amazing folks that I've worked with here. I'll pass it along to my teammate, Adrian, to do an intro on himself.
And hi there, I'm Adrian. Hopefully a few of you recognize both of us from these past webinars, but I'm on the Workforce Solutions team. And excited to jump into some capacity planning talk here.
Fantastic. And a couple of logistics for you all. We will be answering questions throughout the session, but we request that you all please use the Q&A button in the bottom of your Zoom window, just so that we can ensure that our team can get to you all in a timely manner. We have amazing folks from customer success and product to answer you all. And secondly, we will also be following up with the webinar recording in the next 24 hours, and we will also be sending up some follow-up materials that we'll go over with you all at the end of this session. All right, so what we are going to cover today, we will first discuss capacity planning and its significance for your team. We will then dive into the inputs that go into a capacity plan, using a similar demand and supply framework that we have discussed in our previous office hours sessions. We will then go through the outputs of a capacity planning model, which include a hiring plan and a cost analysis. And then lastly, we will wrap up with an example with our favorite MI6 agent who makes a regular appearance at Assembled office hours, James Bond. So I will now hand it off to Adrian to lead us through the rest of the session today.
All right, thanks, Val. So let's jump in here to, while we're all here, what is capacity planning? I want to set the table here and say that as we're going through capacity planning and the example here in these slides today, it is one example of many ways to do this. Capacity planning for every business is completely unique, depending just on the time frame that things are being done out to, whether it's a couple months to a couple of years, and how much fidelity you're going down to in the level of granularity. So I just want to preface it by saying what we're showing here is not an end-all be-all. If it doesn't make sense with your company, that is fine. It's just trying to give ideas of what would be in a capacity plan, but please take these ideas, tweak them, and adjust them as what is going to be best for your organization. So jumping right in here, capacity planning is, and what is forecasting for the capacity planning? Why is it important? It is usually a longer range resource demand plan at the weekly and or monthly level. Capacity planning, how we are looking at it in this view, is not going to be on that operational down to the interval level where you need to put people throughout the day. This is going to be, I need to take a look out and say for the rest of 2022, which I can't believe is only like 6.5 months now, through all the way maybe through 2023, and get an idea there, a high level idea of the amount of people I'm going to need, the amount of cost that might incur, where I'm going to see attrition, all the things that we're going to cover here. A capacity plan, it takes inputs for your demand, and that's going to be from your volume forecast, from your handle time forecast, other variables as well, and then compare that against your forecasted supply, the headcount that you have. And the results here are a plan showing how much supply you're going to need to bring to bear and any anticipated over-unders. Here's a representative spreadsheet here. We're actually going to dive into one that's a little bit simpler in the upcoming slides, but just to give an idea of how this can be kind of broken out as you see that across all the different variables and where we need to go there. So let's jump into what a capacity planning, what is it composed of? And just like a lot, if not most of our workforce problems, it is another supply and demand calculation at its core. Really want to drive that home. So much of what we do in workforce planning is just, we have some sort of demand, we need to match the supply to it. Let's not overcomplicate it because there are so many metrics, so many things that we can dive down into. But at the end of the day, if we can make sure that our supply and demand are meeting, then we are probably going to provide a much better experience for our customers. But on capacity planning, what we've talked about, it's going to extend a long range. And usually, well, actually, I don't want to say usually, it can be at the monthly, sometimes at the weekly level as well. Just depends on kind of how much granularity you want to go down to. Some companies will even start off with a monthly one and then break it down into a weekly, which then goes down into your daily and your interval as you go and you get closer. And then what do you get out of a capacity plan, right? You're putting all this work together, you need to get some outputs from it. So two common outputs are going to be a hiring plan, or at least the inputs to build a hiring plan, and then cost modeling as well. You put together a successful capacity plan, you're going to see where you look to be overstaffed or understaffed, can allow you to see where you need to might move staffing around between different queues, or where you need to start to hire back. And we're going to get into that a little bit more detail, so don't worry if we're just breezing over it right now. But those are some of the key outputs that you can expect to get once you've gone through the exercise here. So let's jump right in to the demand side and really focus on contact volumes and handle times. You can see this is one half of the equation here. This is our demand half. Once again, just driving home, it is supply versus demand. Let's try to keep that in mind as we go through here. So on your volume forecasting, I'm going to introduce a couple concepts here that we haven't gone over before, but are the ones that you can use to get some even more granularity, more fidelity as you start to look into your forecasting for the volume side here. So your customer base, it is what it is. In workforce, we're not always the most clever when it comes to naming things, and a name is exactly what it is. Customer base, how many customers do you expect to have? So in my example over here, you can see we've got 10 million customers, and over these few weeks that we've got outlined at the top, it's growing week over week. That's great. We want our business to grow week over week. This is actually a pretty healthy growth with what, 10,000 and then 15,000 every week. That's awesome. So that's one of the first inputs you're going to get. Usually you're going to get this from your sales forecast. Reason it's probably going to come from the sales forecast is this is something that is usually pretty proprietary. A lot of times for these data points, you may actually have to go through a specific internal NDA process. For public companies, once you start to get access to this information, a lot of times it can put you into blackout timeframes as well. Just because this is not public information, seeing your customer base growth throughout the year, your competitors would love to see that. So just make sure that as you're getting this information, you are also being a very good steward of it and not letting it get out anywhere else. And then beyond that, you've got your expected growth. So this is what we were covering before with the 10,000 and the 25,000. And you want to have that estimated out. A good sales forecast, or whichever team is doing that, is going to have some estimations that you go out to for the next 12 months, maybe even next 3 or 4 years, depending on how long range that forecast comes out. You want to have that plotted in because you don't want to be looking at the same customer base every single week, every single month. If you have a very, very stable business, maybe that's okay. But there's going to be some ebbs and flows, and you want to account for those. So that's our customer base here. And now that you've got the amount of customers, if you have every single one of those customers reaching out every single week, you're going to have a bad time. There's probably something broken in the flow. So really, there's going to be a contact rate or contacts per customer, the CPC that we have here. And just in this example, this is how we're going to figure out the actual volume per week. Is we are going to take a small percentage, and you can see here, it's only 0.23% of the total customer base, and map that out as to this is going to give us our volume that we can expect every week. The nice thing here is that there are ebbs and flows throughout the year. We're going to call that seasonality in this example. And maybe you have a business where back to school times, holidays, things where it's just kind of higher or lower throughout the year. If you have a CPC that is not static and is adjusting, you can see here we're 0.23%, 0.22%. That effectively captures your seasonality, because you can say during this time of the year, we expect that our customers actually contact us less. And during this time of the year, maybe they contact us more than we have seen at other times. And where you're going to get this information from is usually, your Salesforce, whatever CRM system that you're actually using can help to pull out the information here. But you are probably going to have a data analyst or somebody help pull out specifically what the contacts for the customer base is. It may not be an out-of-the-box report, but it is an important one to grab. This is going to help you get your overall volume here, and then we'll go through the rest of these inputs as well. But I do want to point out here, if you don't have this information, if this is a little too advanced, don't fret and say, I cannot do a capacity plan. I don't have customer base out that far. I don't have my contacts per customer. We just don't break it down that far. Use a running average based off the actual growth that you've been seeing, and then some estimates going forward. Use whatever you can to get the best idea, the best estimation going forward. Don't look at this and say, I don't have this one piece, I cannot do this exercise. Just work with what you can and use the best fidelity of information that you have available. And I'm going to pause here for just a second and turn it over and see, do we have any questions that come in? This is a pretty meaty topic, so I want to make sure I pause and let people ask as questions come up.
Yes, Adrian, we have a question, which is around how to plan or allow for uncertainty of demand, what percentage utilization to use.
All right, and that looks like that might be from Bill. So Bill, I didn't include this in this example for a little bit of simplicity, but yes, you're 100% correct. There is another line item you could put on here for uncertainty. So let's say that we're going through and we have our customer base, we have our contacts per customer, but we have an uncertainty of a certain percent that can go up or down. Ideally, in these sort of situations, you want to make sure that you have the amount of staff. So let's say that we only have a certainty of in the high 90s or something. So we might actually go ahead and say, we're going to bump up our demand maybe a couple more percent because we're uncertain. We're not 100% certain. We're never 100% certain in workforce. So we're going to kind of just go ahead and build that in as a little bit of a buffer. If your uncertainty was down somewhere in 60, 70%, maybe it's a good idea to go back and reevaluate some of your inputs. We'll actually go later on and talk about how you should be tracking your actuals to make sure that your inputs are matching up with what you are actually seeing. But yes, you can have uncertainty factors in there. It doesn't have to just be for volume. You can go ahead and do that for any of these particular metrics that you have here as well. And it looks like another one for how do we measure uncertainty that came in. So this one is ideally, if you're going into that level of granularity, you're going to have somebody on staff that is your data analyst, somebody that has gone through and done a whole bunch of statistical modeling and can speak to statistics much better than I can. But they're going to be able to say, hey, I have this much confidence in my forecast, my customer base forecast, my CPC forecast, or whatever. I'll say I don't have a specific, here's exactly how you want to model it. Looking at your actuals, you can see we are within a range of hopefully plus or minus 5%. So maybe we go ahead and layer that on as an uncertainty layer if you want to use what you've been seeing on your deltas between your actuals. Or if you do have somebody with that much more statistical knowledge, have them go through and give you an uncertainty factor. Likely you're going to see that uncertainty factor as you go further and further out. If you had it kind of mapped out on a graph, it would just get wider and wider. So you may not want to apply an uncertainty factor into 2020, 2023, 2024 of a large amount. You may want to say, hey, here's the uncertainty factor we have going forward. It's a couple percent. We've worked with our data analysts to get that. And we are going to actually apply that all the way forward and just adjust. We are going to keep doing this as, once again, not a set it and forget it. We're going to keep adjusting and keep moving that up or down as we need to. All right, so Bill, and it looks like Anonymous, hopefully I answered that well enough. Feel free to ping in more questions and we can circle back to these as well. So we've got the volume side, we've got a customer base, we've got our CPC. Now we're going to go to our average handle time, the AHT forecasting. So as you have probably assumed, I am using an example here with probably a live channel. On your emails, you may not have AHT because emails can take hours. So we're going to say that this is a live channel. We'll just say that it's phones for simplicity's sake coming in here. When you start to do this forecasting here, there's a couple different parts that you want to look at. And once again, how you mix and match these parts is completely up to you. You just want to make sure that you're capturing every single part and the best way that works for you and your business. The first part here is you got to have a baseline. You got to have a goal. And the two parts here is these can be the handle times that you observe from your tenured agents. I want to point out that we're looking specifically for agents that you have said, these are tenured. These are people that are not outside of training, just a few weeks. We can say this is effectively the handle time that we can expect going forward. The other side to this, and this is what I've done in the past, is actually using a goal AHT instead of the observed one. The reason that you would do this is to drive performance. Let's say finance or whoever has come down and said our AHT, our handle time needs to be 800 seconds. It's a pretty aggressive one for the types of phone calls that we're doing. and you're saying, okay, well, our tenured agents are actually trending at, let's see, 808 seconds. So just a little bit over. Well, if you set your AHT, your baseline here to what you're actually observing, you're going to end up bumping up your workload need a little bit higher. Or you can set it to the lower baseline need and say, we're going to need a little bit less staffing, but that's where the uncertainty may come in. We're going to need a little bit less staffing because we're going to use the actual like goal AHT that you've set. However, the uncertainty is in a couple % of what we're actually seeing people run, then we're going to say that that is our uncertainty in our AHT. And there's an easy way to measure it right there. I personally like to use the goal, so you don't have a situation where if your actual AHT continues to go higher and higher than you want, and you just keep adding staff, and it's a little bit of a cycle there. I like to use the goal, but then also report out on if we are not meeting goal and give that as an uncertainty variable and say, hey, we are trying to get them to a certain level, and we are not meeting that certain level. So unless we can correct course, we are going to need to add X amount of staffing to make up for it. So there's another way that we can look at uncertainty and maybe estimate it for this particular line item. For this particular metric here, your AHT, get it for your workforce system like assembled, your CRM, and you want to make sure that you're measuring your full AHT. So since this is a phone example, your talk, your hold, your after call, anything that's going to be comprised of when that customer has connected with the agent, not their hold time, but connected with the agent. Sorry, not their waiting time in the IVR, the queue, but when they get to somebody through that time when the agent said, all right, I've solved their problem, I've written my notes, and now I'm ready to go back in and take the next contact, capture that entire amount of workload time. But yeah, after we get the baseline, you're going to look at your add-on layers. And these are just the ones that increase or decrease the established handle time or the goal. It's most often in the form of seasonality and new hires as well. You can see I've actually broken out the seasonality layer underneath this, which is saying, for these weeks, we're looking at seasonality adds a little bit of time to the goal. And then on the last week, we're actually going to see it remove a second there. It's just making sure that you're capturing every little bit of input you have here. Once again, this is just an example. You do not have to have every single one of these parts in there. And if you can't even capture this data, that is okay. But if you capture the seasonality for this as well, it does help capture those ebbs and flows. You'll see times when maybe it is around the holidays that people maybe a little bit faster. They want to get people out of the holidays. The customer is a little bit happier because it's getting close to the end of the year. So then your time drops on your seasonality layer. And of course, new hires as they come in, depending on how you weave your new hires into your calculation, that may impact the overall AHT if you do pull your new hire AHT up into it, or if you leave that kind of broken out with your class of agents as well. So just make sure that you are putting your different layers and working that through the entire formula as you go by. Before we go on to the next slide here, I do think there might be another question. Is that right, Val?
And we have one from Amanda. And Amanda asked if we are going to go over chat tickets. I'd like to know more about how to incorporate concurrency into FTE calculations. For instance, if agents can take 2 to 3 chats at a time, how does that affect FTEs?
Okay, great. Amanda, I had not planned to go into chat, but you raised a good question. And the solution that I like to use, I'm not saying it is the only solution, is to modify their handle time and get an effective handle time out of this. So if, let's say the chats are taking 1,000 seconds, but you can handle multiple at a time, you can handle 4 at a time, then your effective handle time is going to be divided by 4 because you're taking 1,000 seconds across 4 chats, but you're able in that 1,000 seconds, if you are actually able to do 4 chats at once, effectively, it's only 250 seconds per chat. It may not be the most elegant way to do it, but it does take one of your multipliers, which is your AHT, and then just have that as something that reduces it down. Probably 4 is maybe a high concurrency. Maybe it's 2, so you just cut that in half. If I was personally to track chat, I would have my AHT mapped out, and then I'd have that as a modifier. So I could say, I could also see here is the total chat time, that 800 seconds, that 1,000 seconds, whatever it may be. But then because I've got concurrency for my math, I'm reducing it by the concurrency amount, dividing it by it, but I can still see the overall time just in case we do need to adjust that base time going forward. Hopefully that explains it there. That's how I've done it, and it's worked out really well because it does modify the amount of staffing needed on the long time frame there.
Perfect.
All right.
Adrian, we actually had 2 additional questions come in the chat. One is, will we cover for email and tickets later from Mahesh?
So email and tickets is very similar here. So instead of maybe AHT, you just do your productivity, which can be in hours, and you're just kind of changing the modifier there, that you're basically just taking the amount of contacts by the amount of workload that you are expecting, whether that is a few hours that it takes to go through it or whatnot, and then how much your agents can work back against that, how much supply they can give back. So you just need to adjust these a little bit. If you've got an email that takes a couple hours to work, you're hopefully going to have less of these, but if it does take a couple hours to work, and it is like a couple hours of dedicated, then your handle time for your emails are going to go up. But just like in chat, you're likely going to be able to work a couple emails at the same time. So maybe you use a concurrency in your email and you drop that as well. And you say maybe it takes an agent about 4 hours to do an email, but because they're able to handle maybe 20 emails at once, and they're just kind of waiting for some back and forth information, we're not going to say that our handle time is just a full 4 hours of time. We're going to say it's divided by that 20 and build out from there. So it's just kind of tweaking the inputs as to which channel it is, but the same structure is you need to find out your contacts, you need to find out how much workload per each contact it's going to take. And then on the other part is you bring up your staffing to make sure that you have enough to meet that.
Great. We have another question, Adrian, from Marissa. She asked, is handle time for emails determined by point of resolution or response?
That's a great one as well. This is going to come down a little bit to how your business does things. Emails are tricky because there are multiple stages that they go through. When we measure SLA, that's our service level, so that's usually on the first response. So that person's written in. Maybe we want to get the first response back to them in 24 hours. That's a pretty standard one. So that's one metric. But then there's the actual workload time for the email. And it may not even be, let's say it did take that 4 hours. It may not even be in that full 4 hours is just straight through. It may be they're doing a couple hours here, switching to another email, doing a couple hours there, going back and forth. They may go into a backlog state if there's a response back to the customer. So there's a couple different ways to measure that. Going into that a little bit is there's the actual time that an agent has spent on it. And that's going to be your actual handle time. So let's say I'm an agent and I spend a couple hours researching, crafting my email, maybe doing some tweaks in the back end. I send it out to the customer. I'm no longer actively working on that. So while it's waiting for the customer, that's not going to count and take away from my ability to serve the next customer. I can now switch gears. I can type that the next email. I can help them out. But when that customer on the ticket one writes back, that's effectively let's say restarting the clock and starting to count the time up again. So maybe I do another hour, and I think I said 2 before. So that's 3 hours total I spent on this ticket. The time that was in the customer's hand is not specifically my workload devoted to it. However, you do bring up a good point, Marissa. There is maybe another metric that should be measured as well. And that's maybe the life cycle of the ticket, kind of the overall handle time of the life cycle of a ticket, which does have customer input on there. Because if it takes them a day or 2 to get back, that's outside of our control. Hopefully we've given them all the information that they've needed, but sometimes life just gets in the way. It takes a while to get back. It wouldn't be specifically needed for this exercise with capacity planning to determine the workload needed, because the ball's in their court. It's work that they have to do, but it is another good metric to track overall to see if my agents are only spending a few hours, but it just takes a long time to get these tickets cleared out of the backlog, cleared out. We maybe should dig into why they are sitting with the customer so long for a response or some information back. All right. So I see that there might be one other question that came in. So this one here, when you go down and you want to factor in SLAs at this one, this is where it gets a little bit more complicated. And I'll show you how we are at least estimating not just a base workload, but giving some additional staffing on top of that. with converting to FTEs later on. If you want to go down to the specific SLAs, there's a couple ways that I've done this in the past. If you have some way to calculate exactly each interval and the SLAs that are needed, it's a very, very big undertaking to go in and say, all right, for each of these weeks that I've got here, I'm going to effectively on the back end be calculating down to every single interval when I'm open, when I see contacts expect to come in, and try to get the actual staffing there. We know that when you work it through Erlang, you are going to see some increased staffing. That is adding a lot of complexity. And when you go down that route, you're not going to be able to do it in a spreadsheet. Just to be completely honest, at this point, you're probably going to need some sort of actual program or something written to do all those calculations. Think about how many intervals, even if you're just doing 1 hour intervals per each week, across 52 weeks per year, across 2 or 3 years. It's a lot of calculations. Do that across a few different channels, and you can see how it just gets astronomical. And then you make a tweak, you move some hours of operation around. It can get even more complicated. So there's a couple ways you can do it. One is we'll actually convert the hours needed into full-time equivalent or FTE hours. And that's going to add on some shrinkage time and inflate it a little bit and say, hey, of all the workload we have, we're not really looking at where it's landing, just of all the workload that we have, this is the amount of like full-time employees we're going to need. And then if it truly is that you are not seeing the amount of hours meet your needs, then what I've done in the past is just get some, calculate a sort of SLA adjustment up layer. And the way that I would calculate that is I go through and I work through my entire week, get to my 5,600 hours, and then do a couple of representative weeks where I actually do take it down to the interval level. And maybe that comes out to 5,700 hours or just a little bit higher, and figure out that percentage and say, you know, on average, when we calculate the SLA in, it adds another 5-7% or something like that. So let's apply it to our end workload going forward. Once again, that's getting pretty well into the weeds. There's a lot of different ways to do it. There are, the ideal way would be, of course, to be able to calculate every single interval for the next 3 years and round it up. But in this way, we're trying to take those broad strokes and get us as close as possible without having to spend so much time that all we're doing is spending time with a spreadsheet and not with our family and friends anymore, because it's just encompassed our entire life. So hopefully that answers that one there. All right. So just going back to, as we're working down each one of the sections here, we've gotten our customer base, we've got our CPC, we've got turned that into volume, we've got handle time, we've got some seasonality there. We've worked that into like a total handle time. Now we've got launches, you know, initiatives, sales, launches, whatever it is going to be, that's going to be something outside of this. Holidays, something that's outside of like your normal week. These are the modifiers that you should be plotting and then tracking as their own line items. And I'll cover what I mean by own line items here in a little bit. And just make sure that as you're getting this from the sales or the launch teams, that you are getting as much information about this and the actuals as it comes in on hand. You want to make sure if you are planning for some sort of launch, and then let's say there's a launch coming up and you're like, you know what, we staffed up, service levels are going to look good, and they are not. You want to be able to look back and say, wow, maybe that launch was 2 or 3 times the volume that we thought, or the amount of handle time that it was expected to give us was even higher than what we thought. So that's why we didn't service. We spend a lot of time in workforce going through these forecasts, going through these plans, and I want to make sure that we're calling out exactly what happened and caused that issue. So actually, if you go back to our last webinar on service levels that we just did last month, that's something we specifically called out. Try to break it down to specifically what might have caused those issues, instead of just saying, oh, overall volume is up. Well, maybe volume was up because of the launch. This is something that you want to keep in touch with your launch team as you go through. But to break out the launches on their own line item, that's why you want to split them out. So here's an example of a launch. Maybe we're seeing it's going to drive an extra 10,000 in volume. And this particular launch volume is going to be super short, and it's only going to be 140 seconds. It's just calling to say, hey, you know what? You are signed up for some sort of account. Very simple example here. It's going to add on by itself 389 hours. And this is just a self-contained one where the handle time is only going to be for that particular launch volume. You can have much more complex launches where it's maybe handle time that affects not only the additional launch volume, but all the volume that you've planned out before, or anywhere in between those two extremes there. Just depends on, as you go through a launch, what the team is planning for the event there. But another thing to look at here is, as you've got launches, as you've got events, as you've got something going out there, you need to make sure that if it does become a permanent change. So let's say that your launch team says, we are launching a new way for agents to be able to work through their tickets, and it's going to save 25 seconds across the board. I don't have this mapped specifically out here, but just as an example, it's going to save 25 seconds across the board. You want to map that in as a project, but then say, hey, when do you expect this to just be a part of the baseline? You may see that your baseline or your averages are dropping, but if you continue to have your bases dropping, because it's working, right? Their project is actually working, but at the same time, you continue to have the project pulling your overall handle times down by the project amount, you're going to end up in a situation where you might be underestimating your staffing. So work with your launch team, say, hey, when do we expect this to just become a normal part of their day? It doesn't need to be tracked individually as a launch. Maybe it's only a month, maybe it's only 2. And then you just roll that into your baseline calculations here, because hopefully it was a successful launch that stuck, everybody saved 25 seconds, and everybody's happier there. Just another thing to call out as you are building these out, lots of different moving parts, but please make sure to track them and keep on them as much as possible. And then I know we are running a little bit longer on time, but I do see it looks like there is a question coming in from Amanda. So the hours here, and we cover this a little bit more in the other sections, but the hours is the volume times the handle time. The handle time is in seconds, so we divide by 3,600, which is how you take your seconds to your hours. 60 times 60 gets you your 3,600, and you divide by that. And we'll actually cover that in another slide. But good question. That's how you map it down to the hours. Doing it in a spreadsheet, you would actually have this in just a formula you have there. So we're putting it all together now, right? We need to have hours. We've got the hours from our base assumptions here. We're adding on the hours from the launch volume because it's kind of a self-contained launch. And we've got our total workload hours. And this is how you get, okay, we've got all these pieces. Now I actually have to have something that I can work against. Here's your hours. And here's that divide by 3,600 to get your seconds down into hours. And then remember, hours, they don't translate to people directly. They should be converted to full-time equivalents. Not everybody takes this step, but it is a good step to take. When you do convert to FTEs, you can take into account shrinkage. So let's say people have 45 hours on the books. They spend 5 hours of unpaid on lunches, and then they have breaks, meetings, one-on-ones, coachings, trainings, everything throughout the week. And maybe we only get 30 something hours of production out of them each week. You just divide your workload hours by that production you get from a full-time employee. And there's the FTE needed. Pretty simple calculation there, but it does help to say 5,600 hours, is that a lot or a little? And you can say it's actually this many people as we go through the year. Now, I know I've tried to answer the questions in real time, and it doesn't look like there are any more that have jumped up. So I'm just going to move through to the supply side here. So on the supply, one of the things we want to look at is you've got people, you've got them in place, but you are going to lose people. Doesn't matter how good your company is, you're going to have some sort of attrition. It's just the way of life for whatever it is. Hopefully they're winning the lottery, and that's why you're having attrition. We want the best for everybody here. But you need to account for that so that you start to be able to plan when you need to hire people. So in your attrition, look at it annualized. This is the amount of employees you expect to turn over in the year, and then break it down into that weekly time frame. You can grab this a lot of times from your workforce system, especially your HR system. To get your annualized attrition, you're going to take your 12 months of your average of the 12 months of agents that you have staffed, divide it by the number of attrited agents, and then get that down to the weekly level. So if you have a certain amount of agents throughout the year, you attrit just a few of them. There's your overall yearly attrition. And then you divide it by into 12 months or into 52 weeks to get it for the actual weeks or months, depending on the level that you are forecasting for here in your capacity plan. Now, it's really good not to include fractions here because you cannot split a person. So as you can see here, I marked off attrition. Now you'd want to actually kind of have some sort of running tally, and maybe it's you're looking to have attrition of about half a person a week, maybe a third of a person a week. Don't take a third of a person out of your tenured agents. Wait till it gets to that one and it's rounded up, because you have a full person and that's when you assume them to leave. It doesn't have to be perfect, right? We're looking out over the next 12 months, 24 months, 36 months. It gives an idea, but it does help when you're looking at it, say, we're losing half a person, or, I've gotten many questions before I did this where, what do you mean we have 130.275 people? It's hard for people to wrap their head around. You don't want to just round all your numbers. So wait till you have about a full person to trade it out or more, and then have them come out of your staffing there. And then actually on your other side, now that you've got your tenured agents, you've got that mapped up against the actual FTE needs, you're going to get your agent delta down here. I didn't include this on the other side, but I'm going to go ahead and jump into to hiring. This is one of your things that you need to look at. So when you're hiring, as you start to plan this out, you're starting to see into the future, what are my deltas going to be? This is where a lot of people sometimes start to get their eyes open in capacity plans. When you look at hiring and you're needing to fill in those gaps that you're seeing further out, you got a time to source, you got a time to train, and you got a time to full productivity. So as we actually work with a lot of customers, sometimes we will start to just talk through these sort of capacity plans and how they're looking. And when they start to really build out their thought in the longer term, it says, oh, maybe for Christmas coming up, which is 6.5 months away, based on my long time to source, my long time to train, and then my time to full productivity, I need to be finding people now, even though it's for the end of the year. Let's say it takes you 2 or 3 months just to get enough people to fill in a class. It's hard to hire people. People have a lot of options, which is great, but it doesn't mean it's going to be as easy as maybe it was a couple of years ago to go fill up a 15 to 20 person class to get into your call center. So you need to factor that in. How long is it going to take to source a full class? How long is it going to take to train them? Some companies, you might only have a couple weeks of training. I know when I actually worked at T-Mobile and took phone calls, I spent 9 weeks in training. Very little actual productivity time. It was 9 weeks of in the classroom, shadowing, things like that. So you're looking at over 2 months of backing up that you have to have people in place before you can even have them start to hit the phones. And that's where we get to the time to full productivity. When they get out of training, they're not going to be perfect. Maybe you have one superstar who comes out and is nailing their handle times, or even better than anybody else. But you're likely going to have people come out and maybe they're even double the handle time that a tenured agent is. And that's fine as long as they're making some progress going forward. You just want to make sure as you are accounting for this and you're kind of working this into your calculations, if you have multiple classes and they kind of get better each week over week, that you just work those into your calculations and you say, you can stack your classes, you can do some weighted averages back into your overall handle time needs. But it is good to track each class individually. Sometimes people drop out of the classes. Sometimes classes do better than others. A lot of times I've seen this ask of me in the workforce planning of, hey, we just launched a new curriculum with this class. Can you let me know if their handle time and they got to full handle time faster than other classes as well? So just things to track when you go through the hiring and you're starting to look at how you need to blend them into your plans as well. All right, so that is one of the outputs there. You figured out how you need to hire, where you need to hire, and started to back them into it with that backup plan of, remember, it is time to source, time to actually get them through training, and then time for them to be fully productive outside of that. So one of the other outputs that you can get here, which is a pretty key one, is your costs over next year or X time frame. It's pretty easy, right? You've got hours, you've got FTE, you can apply an actual cost metric to that. Once again, you probably are going to need to go through and get some sort of authorization to get cost estimates. Sometimes your finance team may say, just send us over the FTE or the hours and we could turn it into a cost estimate. But in any case, it's really just timesing it by whatever that metric is to get your total costs that you're going to see week over week. Then you can sum them up to your month, to your year, to whatever time frame you need. Things to watch out for here: take snapshots, take monthly iterations. I have been burned many times myself where a spreadsheet crashes, something happens, a change happens, and I don't have that backup to go to revert back to. Or more importantly, I get asked the question, hey, our costs went up by even $5,000 for next year. Why? If you have a snapshot and you have monthly iterations, going back to what we talked about before, even breaking out your launches individually, you can say, oh, maybe this launch went up by 5,000 calls, and that's exactly what's driving up our costs. Or we are actually adjusting our overall handle time goal up by 4 seconds, and it's going to drive this much cost across the year. Without those snapshots and those iterations to compare against, you're going to be scrambling to explain that. And I'll tell you, if you can get this down into a cadence and you get finance what they want as quickly as they want, they are going to be your friends and you're going to have a much easier time of things. And then finally, capture actuals. This goes for all the metrics here, but if you have either just a place in your capacity plan or maybe even a place that you're capturing like in a secondary one, capture actuals. You can see, are you running close to your costs? Are you running close to that handle time? Which parts are not meeting and which parts do you need to tweak in your assumptions going forward? This is great because sometimes there is a cost. Maybe this is how your business does it. And you say, I need $10 million to do my support throughout 2022. And maybe you're actually averaging underneath that. And you say, we have optimized, we've been more efficient. We're into June and we've actually saved $1 million. We've saved 10%, which is great. Well, now we have a little bit of that buffer, maybe through the end of the year to say, we can do another launch, or we can do this, we can do that. We can actually push a little bit more because we're keeping actuals, seeing how we're trending, and maybe reallocating that budget as we're going through. This goes back to, this is not a set it and forget it. Update, adjust, tweak, change your inputs as you're going with the more accurate data as you're going through there. All right, we're going to go quickly through the James Bond example because I know we are about 45 minutes into there, but Val, is there another question that's come in?
Yes, we do have a question from Dat, and maybe it might be better to, after we answer this question, to go through James Bond and then save questions for the very end for the sake of time. But Dat is asking, how would you approach staffing projections if our support team is responding to both emails and chats simultaneously, alternating between channels within each hour?
Okay, that's a great question. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to back up. So excuse me while I move through some slides really quickly to give an example here of what we just mapped it out. So this is an example, and we'll just say that it is calls. What I would do, me personally, is I would take and I would have basically two of these. I would do my email and then my chat as well. Each one of them have their own specific workload. So I would work out the customer base, my contacts that are going to emails, this 0.23%, maybe it's only 0.1% that's going to emails and the rest is going to chat, right? And you're working out the full workload of hours needed for chat and the full workload of hours needed for email. And you get down to these hours and then you bring them together. You say, all right, I've got my chat, I've got my emails, I've put all my inputs into there. I bring together the hours and now I turn that into FTE. And the reason I stressed that you bring the hours together is that if you already do kind of the FTE calculations and you bring in all the shrinkage, it's going to add a little bit more. So you say, here's all the workload I need for chat. Here's all the workload I need for email, even though they're doing it at the same time. I know I personally couldn't actually be typing a chat to somebody and effectively working on an email. So they do have to actually divide their time up a little bit, stop working on that email to work on a chat, or, have different parts throughout the day where this is devoted to chat, this is devoted to email. And then I've worked out my actual amount of hours for each one of those. I roll it together. If you want to throw a phone in there as well, maybe you've got a routing system that is able to give them in one of those contacts and shut off the other contacts. Work it out for all three of those channels, roll up your workload hours, and then do your FTE calculations from there. And that'll give you an idea of what you need across a blended environment. All right, that was a great question though. Cool, so let's jump in with James Bond here, our favorite MI6 agent. James Bond needs to estimate staff and needed and costs through 2023. The table here is not going to go through 2023. We're just going to give some examples here. But what do we do here? We got to collect the inputs. It's what we talked about. James starts by collecting the inputs on the workload, which is going to be your handle times, your volumes, whatever it is for your next 18 months. They're going to get those data points from the systems and reports, sales forecasts, CRMs, workforce tools, etc. And a royal wedding. They seem to happen a lot. They're big deals. That's coming up. So we need to adjust the forecast accordingly. This is a very, very simplified version of what we were seeing before. But as they're starting to map out the months, going all the way through to 2023, we've got our volumes, we've got our handle times, and then we've broken up the wedding volume and the wedding handle times as well. So again, we're just collecting the inputs at this point. We're going to put it all together. We need to combine these. This is at a monthly level here, but we're actually doing it at the weekly level on the back end to get our hours of workload needed. And then we're going to combine those hours of workload into FTE conversions. Here I've actually done 4 weeks per month. So that's why you don't see a crazy jump up in the headcount needed, but it's the same thing. You're just doing the math going down there. But since there's a lot of moving parts out there, and Raul Silva is out to sabotage. That sounds like a good James Bond, enemy nemesis name. They're out to sabotage the operation. James makes sure to save snapshots. Click that save button, and then be able to show iterative changes and do recovery. I'm pretty sure that MI6 has lost some spreadsheets before, so save those, be able to look back and see what changes were made, and don't have to redo all your work if something happens. And then finally, with that capacity plan built, James can look ahead through 2023. Once again, this would just continue out with all your formulas and your inputs and see what staffing is needed. With the known sourcing and ramp up times that we've seen, we can start to build that work back to when we actually need to hire people. Honestly, with the royal wedding coming up in August, probably need to hire people now, probably actually needed to hire people a while back. And then with that FTE information, James can turn that into a cost per month. It's pretty expensive to have hundreds of agents at a good salary, but that is a cost that we can then estimate month over month, week over week, year over year, and apply out from there. So that's how we put it together real quickly. James is a pro with this. They do this, royal weddings, they happen a lot. They roll with the flow here, and they get everything put out into the spreadsheet. So now we are at about 50 minutes in, and I want to go ahead and see if there's any more questions that have popped up, Val.
Yes, we have a question from Gopi, a few actually. So the first one here is in terms of an industry benchmark, what kind of error is acceptable?
All right. I love the industry benchmark question because everybody's looking for one, but Gopi, you may be the one to set the industry benchmark. 5% gets thrown around a lot. I would say as you go through each of these inputs, if you can aim to be 5% or less, that's going to be great. Because think about it, if you have, let's say the max here, 5% on your volumes, your customer base, like every single one of those inputs that you have 5% on, it's going to stack up. So the closer you can get to that is better. It'd be great if at the end your hours were only about 5% off, but you have individual variances inside of there. But do your best. If you're getting to 10%, especially if you're getting to 10% further up the chain and just your customer base is 10% off, and that just gets multiplied through, maybe try to evaluate and see kind of what's driving that different. But I always go with the 5% and I shoot to be better than that. What's the second one, Val?
Second question is, when we are checking for accuracy, is there a way of attributing which assumption was incorrect? For example, a product assumption.
Yep, that's exactly what I was saying. Great question. Exactly what I was saying. Break out if you have launches or anything specifically, or we were talking about chat and email, break these out individually instead of lumping everything together, and then pull your actuals. Probably the hardest one is going to be getting volume specifically attributed to a launch. And this is where you really want to work with the launch team. They should not just be, hey, here's some numbers, dump it off, bye, good talking with you. They should also be, here's how we're going to measure it. Maybe we're going to have some sort of IVR tag that pulls this in. Maybe there's going to be something that you can tag if you're doing emails or chats with a little drop down, or even a phone that you can tag it so we can actually see volume. But then, yes, you'd want to have that specifically broken out, and each one of those line items that we went through before, map it in your actuals. And then you can see the variance on each one of those. Was it your customer base was different? Was it the contacts per customer was different? And just break it out from there. Was it that particular launch actually was super successful? We were 100% greater than we needed to be. Well, great. We sold a lot of widgets, whatever it was, but also our staffing was under because of that. So just each one of those line items, try to measure to exactly that part, and then you'll get your variances broken down really granularly for you.
Awesome. We have a final question from Gopi, which is, how do we measure accuracy?
Yep, great. So that's the same part. Put in your actuals and just figure out the difference. If you had 100 for one of your inputs there and it was 105, then you're 5% over. Simple as that. And that's what you want to do. Map in your actuals, get your accuracy from there, and then you can apply that forward. So as we were talking about before, maybe there is a certain amount of confidence level that we want to apply forward. And we say, hey, we've done everything we can. We've gotten super close on this, but we're still seeing about a 5% variance, maybe a 10% variance overall. So we're going to put that as our assumption layer going forward, and then talk to your finance team and say, hey, we think it's going to be X. It could be up to 10% more. Here's all the reasons why we think that and how we've tried to get as accurate as possible. But you've already got all of your assumptions and you've got all your actuals. So you've got everything you need there. And you just got to do a little bit more math to figure out what your accuracy was there.
We also had two questions from Kyle. One is, how do you measure shrinkage? And another is, how do you factor time to full productivity into the model?
Yep. Okay. So let's go back. Apologies that I'm going through this super quickly. So on shrinkage, this is where your FTE calculation takes into account shrinkage. If you want to measure it, this is, I'm just going to give an example here. Somebody that gets paid 40 hours may have 45 hours on the books because 5 of those hours are unpaid for the lunch. 1 lunch a day, hour lunch, not paid. And then you take that 40 hours that's left over, and then you start to minus out the other bits of shrinkage, your coachings, your team meetings, whatever else is going to be in there. And then you get the difference of, we expected them to have, they get 45 hours on the books. They end up with 32 hours, and you can figure out the percentage that difference of there. I don't specifically have that called out here because I'm using that in the FTE definition here. So if this was actually in the spreadsheet, you would see I'm just dividing by the maybe 32 hours we get per person per week. But if you needed to actually measure individual shrinkage, that's how you do it. Look at the amount of staffing you have, look at the amount of staffing after you've plotted everything into their schedule, and figure out the percent difference there. Somewhere, I think 25% is pretty low shrinkage. You put in breaks, you put in lunches throughout the day, you're already into the teens. 25% is low, but not unheard of. Around the 30 or so % shrinkage is pretty normal that we see in a call center where you're not trying to run things really, really to the line. And I'm sorry, Val, what was the second question to that?
Yes, so we had another question on time to productivity.
Yes.
How do you factor time to full productivity into the model?
Great question. And I probably did glaze over that. So here you can see I've got just a class of agents here, and it's 15 people, but every week their handle time is actually getting lower. And that's something that you're going to measure and bring down. Now, what I'm doing on this is I'm actually bringing their handle time up into the total handle time here. So this handle time is being weighted average up into this one. We've got our baseline, we've got our seasonality, and then we're using these 15 people at 1500 seconds to bring our total handle time up, which of course makes our workload go up, right? And then you can see it dropping actually as we go along here. So now that they're 3 weeks in for this class 1, they're down to 900 seconds, which is almost at target. You can see there's barely any lift to the overall AHT I'm using for my model. And hopefully in the next couple of weeks, they'd be right at goal and we'd be set. Now, if you had multiple concurrent classes, you might have class 2, class 3, and they could be at different time ranges where they're not all in week 1. Some of them might be at week 2 or week 3 because they didn't all start at the same time. And you would just weight average those back into your total AHT up there, and you'd see it trend downward as people get more and more efficient. And then, of course, we talk about the actuals going in, is you can plan in for each of these classes. Were they actually 1,500 seconds coming out of week 1? Maybe they're getting better. Maybe your training teams are awesome. They're always looking to improve. Maybe they've rolled out some new curriculum that's made people come out of the class and be at 1,200 seconds the first week instead of 1,500. These are things that you can go through with your actuals and plan in for the next class coming forward, and adjust your models as you get more and more information.
Great. And we have time for one final question.
Right.
I know that we are running up on time.
I'm loving all the questions though. This is great.
That's great. Loving it. Loving it. We have a question from Amanda asking, do you include also daily planned and or unplanned absences in shrinkage percentage?
That is a great one, Amanda. Because we are trying to assume how much we are getting out of people, so how much we need to staff, I would say for this example, I would, but it's probably not going to be a large amount. So let's say we assume it's 32 hours of production that we get out of per week per agent. Ideally, the planned or unplanned absences is a small amount. So maybe now instead of 32, when we actually do the math and we look at a large enough data sample, we say, all right, it's actually 31.8 hours that we get annualized out. So it's not a big difference, but I would pull it in to try to get just that amount of accuracy there as well. This is one of those places where I would actually maybe use a decimal, because you're talking about hours and not a full person, but just the hours a person can work. And you can explain that as well. If somebody asks, and there's 31.8 hours, to say, yes, here's all the shrinkage. And then the absences that we see. It happens. People have lives, things happen. Took it down a little bit more.
Fantastic. Thanks, Adrian, for that. I know we had a number of questions also come into the chat as well now and throughout the presentation, but we will definitely be sending up some follow-up links for you all to be able to continue the conversation with us. And we really want to make sure that we get to your questions ultimately in some follow-up one-on-one sessions. So we'll be sending out a link for you to chat with Adrian further on any of your WFM needs from capacity planning and other aspects. We also, secondly, have actually launched assembled WFM or workforce management services. And this actually includes guiding you through a capacity planning model, attrition modeling, and hiring ramp up. We will pair you with a WFM expert to go through those details and create a model that best fits your support team's needs using the inputs Assembled generates. So we'll be sending further information on that as well. And lastly, a link to sign up with a demo with our team if you are newer to Assemble. Thank you so much, everyone, for attending and looking forward to staying in touch.
Thanks, everyone.